What I'm about to reveal to you today has been hidden for almost 2,000 years, and it's no coincidence that you're here listening to this right now. There are forces that have worked tirelessly to ensure this truth never reaches your ears. But something is changing. Light always finds a way to break through the deepest darkness. Have you ever wondered why you feel that inexplicable emptiness when you leave Mass? Why don't the words you hear from the pulpit resonate with that inner voice screaming that something isn't right? That restlessness you feel isn't rebellion. It's your soul realizing it's been lied to. This was silenced for almost 2,000 years. The Church had more than 1,700 years to erase this truth, to rewrite history, to turn pure light into controlling dogma. But there are secrets that not even the most absolute power can bury forever. And today those secrets are coming to light. Imagine for a moment that everything you were taught about faith, about Jesus, about the path to the divine, was only an edited, manipulated version, designed not to free you but to keep you bound. Imagine if there existed a truth so powerful, so transformative, that those who knew it were persecuted, silenced, erased from official history. That truth exists. And it's contained in texts that were banned, gospels that were burned, teachings that were declared heretical not because they were false, but precisely because they were too true, because they threatened the system of control that was being built on the ashes of authentic spirituality. Jesus never founded a church. He never spoke of hierarchies, of intermediaries between you and the divine, of sacred buildings where you had to go to find God. His original words, the ones that were censored, spoke of something completely different. They spoke of a kingdom within you, of a light you already possess, of a power that doesn't need priests or temples to manifest itself. But this didn't suit those who wanted to build an empire on faith. A message that liberated people, that connected them directly to their divine essence, wasn't useful to them. They needed dependence, they needed fear, they needed control. And that's why they erased the true teachings. At the Council of Nicaea, more than 1,600 years ago, a group of politically motivated men decided which gospels would be official and which would be banned forever. They weren't chosen by divine inspiration. They were chosen for political convenience. And with that decision, humanity lost access to truths that could have changed the course of spiritual history. Today, these forbidden texts are being rediscovered. The Gospels of Thomas, Philip, and Mary Magdalene, documents that reveal a completely different Jesus than the one we were taught, a teacher who did not come to create a religion, but to awaken the divinity that already exists in every human being. Do you feel that chill? That feeling that something deep is stirring inside you as you hear these words? It's your soul recognizing truths it always knew, but had been taught to forget. It's the awakening of something that was never truly lost, only buried beneath centuries of sacred lies. What comes next could change your faith forever, not to destroy it, but to free it from the chains that have kept it prisoner, to restore you to the direct connection with the divine that was always your birthright, to show you that the kingdom of heaven is not a place you go after you die, but a state of consciousness you can experience here and now. But before we go any further, I need you to understand something. This truth isn't for everyone. Not everyone is ready to let go of spiritual crutches and walk on their own into the light. Not everyone has the courage to face the fact that they were deceived by those they trusted most. What I'm about to reveal to you today has been hidden for almost 2,000 years, and it's no coincidence that you're here listening to this right now. There are forces that have worked tirelessly to ensure this truth never reaches your ears, but something is changing. Light always finds a way to break through the deepest darkness. Have you ever wondered why you feel that inexplicable emptiness when you leave Mass? Why don't the words you hear from the pulpit resonate with that inner voice screaming that something isn't right? That restlessness you feel isn't rebellion. It's your soul realizing it's been lied to. This was silenced for almost 2,000 years. The Church had more than 1,700 years to erase this truth, to rewrite history, to turn pure light into controlling dogma. But there are secrets that not even the most absolute power can bury forever. And today, those secrets are coming to light. Imagine for a moment that everything you were taught about faith, about Jesus, about the path to the divine, was only an edited, manipulated version, designed not to free you, but to keep you bound. Imagine if there existed a truth so powerful, so transformative, that those who knew it were persecuted, silenced, erased from official history. That truth exists. And it's contained in texts that were banned, gospels that were burned, teachings that were declared heretical not because they were false, but precisely because they were too true, because they threatened the system of control that was being built on the ashes of authentic spirituality. Jesus never founded a church. He never spoke of hierarchies, of intermediaries between you and the divine, of sacred buildings where you had to go to find God. His original words, the ones that were censored, spoke of something completely different. They spoke of a kingdom within you, of a light you already possess, of a power that doesn't need priests or temples to manifest itself. But this didn't suit those who wanted to build an empire on faith. A message that liberated people, that connected them directly to their divine essence, wasn't useful to them. They needed dependence, they needed fear, they needed control. And that's why they erased the true teachings. At the Council of Nicaea, more than 1,600 years ago, a group of politically motivated men decided which gospels would be official and which would be banned forever. They weren't chosen by divine inspiration. They were chosen for political convenience. And with that decision, humanity lost access to truths that could have changed the course of spiritual history. Today, these forbidden texts are being rediscovered. The Gospels of Thomas, Philip, and Mary Magdalene, documents that reveal a completely different Jesus than the one we were taught, a teacher who did not come to create a religion, but to awaken the divinity that already exists in every human being. Do you feel that chill? That feeling that something deep is stirring inside you as you hear these words? It's your soul recognizing truths it always knew, but had been taught to forget. It's the awakening of something that was never truly lost, only buried beneath centuries of sacred lies. What comes next could change your faith forever, not to destroy it, but to free it from the chains that have kept it prisoner, to restore you to the direct connection with the divine that was always your birthright, to show you that the kingdom of heaven is not a place you go after you die, but a state of consciousness you can experience here and now. But you are here. You have reached this point, and that means there's something in you that is awakening, something that refuses to continue sleeping in the comfort of pretty lies. I recognize that thirst in your eyes, that sacred restlessness that brought you here. It's the same thirst felt by all seekers of truth throughout history. Maybe you grew up in a family where religion was unquestionable, where asking questions was sinful and doubting was betrayal. Maybe you were taught that you were a born sinner, that you needed external salvation, that without the church you were lost. And for years, perhaps decades, you carried that guilt, that fear, that feeling of never being enough in God's eyes. Or perhaps you were one of those who walked away completely fed up with the hypocrisy, the control, the contradictions. But something inside you never stopped searching, never stopped feeling that there was an authentic spirituality somewhere, beyond corrupt institutions and manipulative dogmas. Both paths lead to the same place, a thirst for genuine spiritual truth. And that thirst is sacred. It's the call of your soul reminding you of who you really are, beyond what you've been told you should be. I've been where you are now. I've felt that mixture of fascination and terror that comes with discovering that everything you thought was solid is shaking. I've experienced that terrifying liberation of letting go of familiar chains to embrace truths no one had taught me. And I know what it feels like to walk alone on the path of authentic searching. But here's the magic. You are not alone. There are millions of souls awakening right now. There is a silent revolution of consciousnesses that refuse to be manipulated any longer. And every time someone like you discovers these truths, the light expands a little more in this world that needs it so much. That's why I need you to do something right now. If you too feel like there's something that doesn't fit with what you were taught, if your soul is resonating with these words, if you feel like you've been searching for something you didn't know how to name, then subscribe right now. Do it for yourself. Do it for your awakening. Do it for that part of you that refuses to live in the lie. Because on this channel, we will continue to unearth truths they don't want you to know. We will explore forbidden texts. We will unmask historical manipulations. We will walk together on the path of liberated spirituality. Each video is a step closer to your spiritual freedom, to your direct connection with the divine, to awakening that light that has always been within you. But this isn't just information, it's transformation. Every truth you discover here will change something inside you. It will heal wounds you didn't even know you had. It will free you from fears you inherited from generations of religious manipulation. It will restore to you the spiritual power that was always yours by divine right. Look, I know it's difficult to question what your parents, your grandparents, perhaps your entire family for generations have believed to be absolute truth. I know it's scary to discover that those you trusted most spiritually may not have had the whole truth. I know it's painful to realize you were raised in a system designed to keep you small, dependent, and controlled. But I also know that on the other side of that fear lies the most beautiful freedom imaginable. The freedom to connect directly with the divine, without intermediaries. The freedom to find God within yourself, not in man-made buildings. The freedom to walk your spiritual path without anyone telling you how, when, or where to seek the sacred. That freedom isn't just for a select few. It's for anyone who has the courage to seek the truth beyond the official versions. It's for you who came this far by following that inner voice that whispers that there is something more authentic, something more powerful than what you've been shown. So subscribe, join this community of truth seekers, become part of this collective awakening, and prepare for a journey that will change not only what you believe, but who you are. Because truth not only frees the mind, it transforms the soul. Now that you're here, now that you've decided to open your mind to possibilities beyond what you've been taught, it's time to delve into the greatest mystery in the spiritual history of humanity. But before I reveal the hidden secrets, I need you to ask yourself a question that will change your perspective forever. Why did Jesus never talk about creating an organized religion? Think about it deeply. At no point in any of the Gospels allowed in the official Bible will you find Jesus saying, "Build temples in my name, create a hierarchy of priests, establish dogmas that people must blindly follow," or "I will be the sole intermediary between you and God." Doesn't that seem strange to you? The supposed founder of Christianity never founded Christianity as we know it. His words, when analyzed without the filters of centuries of institutional interpretation, point to something completely different. Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven as something present, as an inner reality, as a state of consciousness that each person could achieve here and now. Not as a distant place you would go to after death if you followed the right rules. He spoke of awakening, of enlightenment, of direct, personal transformation. But that didn't suit those who would come after them. Because if every person can connect directly with the divine, if the kingdom is within each of us, if salvation is a process of personal awakening, why do you need a church? Why do you need intermediaries? Why do you need a power structure that tells you how, when, and where to seek God? And here the mystery begins. Because what happened after Jesus' death wasn't the natural expansion of his teachings. It was the systematic manipulation of his message to create something he never imagined, an institution of spiritual control. During the first centuries after his death, dozens of different Christian communities existed, each with its own interpretation of the Master's teachings. Some followed the words of Paul, others those of Peter, others those of Thomas, and others those of Mary Magdalene. It was a diverse, decentralized movement where personal spiritual experience was more important than uniform doctrine. But this represented a problem for the Roman Empire, a decentralized spiritual movement where every person had direct access to the divine was impossible to control. It was dangerous to the established order. It was a threat to the political and economic power of the time. Then something happened that changed history forever. Emperor Constantine, who was not a Christian when he made this decision, saw an opportunity. If he couldn't destroy Christianity, he would absorb it. He would turn it into a tool of the state. He would transform it from a spiritual liberation movement into a system of social control. And so the councils were born, meetings of men with political interests who decided, not by divine inspiration, but for imperial convenience, which teachings would be official and which would be heretical, which texts would become part of the Bible, and which would be banned forever. Do you realize the irony? Jesus' true teachings were declared heretical by a church that claimed to follow him. The texts that contained his most profound, most transformative, most liberating words were burned, banned, and buried. But why? What did these forbidden gospels contain that was so dangerous to the new power structure being built? They contained the truth you are about to discover. They contained the teachings that would have made religious control impossible. They contained the words that reminded you that you are already divine, that you don't need external salvation, that spiritual power is within you waiting to be awakened. What comes next could change your faith forever, not to destroy it, but to free it from the chains that have held it prisoner for nearly 2,000 years. Because when you discover what Jesus really said, when you see what his true teachings were before they were edited and manipulated, you will realize that authentic spirituality is far more powerful and far more accessible than you were ever told. But before I reveal these secrets, I need to warn you of something. Once you know this truth, you can't return to comfortable ignorance. Once you see how the original message was manipulated, you won't be able to pretend you don't know. Once you experience the direct connection with the divine that Jesus truly taught, spiritual crutches will become unnecessary. Are you ready for that level of spiritual responsibility? Are you ready to walk your path without anyone telling you every step you need to take? Do you have the courage to find God within yourself instead of looking for him in the places you've been told he is? Because that is the invitation this moment is extending to you. You are not just going to receive information. It's an initiation, an awakening, an invitation to recover the spiritual power that was always yours, but that you were taught to give to others. The secrets are about to be revealed. The forbidden texts will speak after centuries of silence, and you will discover who you really are when no one tells you who you should be. Now let's get to the facts. Let's look at the historical evidence that has been hidden in dusty libraries, in remote monasteries, in archives that very few have had the privilege of consulting. Because what I'm about to show you isn't conspiracy theories. They're real documents, historical testimonies, evidence that any serious researcher can verify. In 1945, in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, a farmer searching for fertilizer for his crops found a clay jar buried in the desert. Inside that jar were 13 papyrus codices containing 52 ancient texts. Texts that had been lost for more than 1,500 years. Texts that the church had declared heretical and ordered destroyed. But some early Christians, knowing that these writings contained sacred truths, hid them in the desert before they could be burned. And thanks to that act of spiritual courage, we can now read the words they didn't want us to know. The Gospel of Thomas begins with a statement that shakes the foundations of everything you've been taught. These are the secret words that Jesus the living spoke and that Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. Secret words, not words for the masses, not public teachings designed to create a religion of control, words for those who were ready to awaken. And the first of those secret words will shock you. Whoever finds the interpretation of these words will not taste death. It doesn't speak of salvation after death. It speaks of transcending death here and now through the awakening of consciousness. The same gospel records these words of Jesus. If those who lead you say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in heaven," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. But the kingdom is within you and outside you. Do you notice? Jesus wasn't talking about a physical place you would go to after you die. He was talking about a state of consciousness you already possess. But there's more. The Gospel of Philip, another forbidden text, reveals something the church has hidden for centuries: the fundamental role of Mary Magdalene in Jesus' teachings. This Gospel states, "The companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. The Lord loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her frequently on the mouth." Why was this hidden? Because recognizing a woman's spiritual leadership role was not appropriate for a patriarchal structure that was being built on the exclusion of women from religious power. Mary Magdalene was not a repentant prostitute, as we were taught. She was a spiritual leader, an initiate, possibly Jesus' most advanced disciple. The Gospel of Philip itself contains this revelation. Those who say that one must first die and then be resurrected are mistaken. If one does not first receive the resurrection while alive, one will receive nothing at death. Again, it is not speaking of future salvation. It speaks of present awakening. Before I continue revealing more evidence to you, I need you to do something. I need you to show me that you're truly committed to uncovering the truth. Before continuing, tell me in the comments, have you ever suspected the church was hiding something? Write down these exact words. I want the truth. Because what comes next is even more shocking. But I need to know that there are real people on the other side of this screen. People who aren't just consuming content, but are waking up. People who have the courage to face uncomfortable truths. While you're writing your comment, let me tell you about the Council of Nicaea in 325. This wasn't a spiritual event. It was a political meeting convened by Emperor Constantine, who wasn't even a Christian at the time. Its goal wasn't to preserve the teachings of Jesus. Its goal was to create a version of Christianity that would serve the interests of the Roman Empire. At that meeting, 300 bishops from different regions of the empire debated not about spirituality, but about power. They decided which texts would be included in the official biblical canon and which would be banned. And their criterion was not spiritual authenticity. Their criterion was political utility. Texts that promoted a direct connection with the divine were rejected. Texts that emphasized ecclesiastical authority were accepted. Gospels that presented Jesus as a teacher of inner wisdom were banned. Texts that presented him as a figure in need of intermediaries were canonized. And do you know what's most revealing about all this? Many of the banned texts are older than some of those included in the official Bible. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, contains sayings of Jesus that many scholars consider closer to his original words than the edited versions that appear in the canonical Gospels. But the most compelling evidence comes from the Church's own official documents. In the minutes of the Council of Constantinople in 553, we find the explicit order to destroy all writings that contradicted official doctrine. They literally ordered the burning of sacred books because they contained truths that did not suit the established powers. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, considered the father of ecclesiastical history, wrote in his work, Evangelical Preparation, "It will sometimes be necessary to use lies as medicine for those who need such treatment." Do you understand? One of the founders of official Christian historiography openly admitted that lying was acceptable if it served the purposes of the Church. And here's the most shocking evidence of all. In the Vatican archives, which were only partially open to the public in recent years, there are documents confirming the existence of at least 30 different Gospels circulating in the early centuries of Christianity, 30 different versions of Jesus' teachings. And only 4 were chosen to be part of the official Bible. Don't you find it suspicious that out of 30 testimonies about the Master's teachings, only 4 have survived, and that those 4 were chosen not for their spiritual authenticity, but for their usefulness in creating a centralized power structure? Now, as you process all this information, I want you to ask yourself this question. If spiritual truth was manipulated almost 2,000 years ago to serve political interests, what other truths about your divine nature have been hidden from you? What other spiritual powers do you possess that you have been taught to surrender to outside institutions? Because this is just the tip of the iceberg. What you just heard is merely the first evidence of a spiritual conspiracy that spans millennia. And every document I've mentioned exists. Every quote is verifiable. Every date is accurate. I'm not inventing anything. I'm revealing what was always there, hoping someone would have the courage to expose it. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, contains entire dialogues between her and Jesus about the nature of spiritual reality that never appeared in the official texts. These conversations explain that salvation does not come from outside, but from the recognition of the divine light that already dwells within each person. In the Gospel of Truth, also found at Nag Hammadi, Jesus speaks about the fundamental error that keeps humanity in ignorance, believing that they are separate from the divine, when in reality they are expressions of the same divine essence that he represented. Do you realize the magnitude of what was hidden? Not just texts, but a completely different understanding of spirituality. A vision where every human being is inherently divine, where the connection to the sacred is direct and immediate, where no intermediaries or institutions are needed to experience God's presence. This explains why these texts had to be banned, because a humanity that knew its divine nature would be impossible to control, A humanity that knew it already possessed everything necessary for spiritual fulfillment would not be dependent on external structures of religious power. But now you know. Now you have access to these truths that were hidden for centuries. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to continue pretending you don't know? Or are you going to begin your own journey of awakening to authentic spiritual truth? Now we come to the heart of the mystery. Let's delve into the exact words that were banned, the teachings they considered so dangerous that they preferred to burn them rather than allow humanity to know them. Because what these Gospels reveal isn't just different from what you were taught, it's revolutionary. The Gospel of Thomas begins with a promise that challenges the entire traditional system of salvation. These are the hidden words that Jesus the living spoke, and that Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, "Whoever finds the explanation of these words will not taste death." It's not talking about blind faith. It's talking about understanding. It's not talking about salvation after death. It's talking about transcending death through understanding. And the first revelation will shock you. If your guides tell you, "Look, the kingdom is in heaven," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they tell you it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. But the kingdom is within you and it is outside you. Do you realize what this means? Jesus wasn't promising a future paradise. He was revealing a present reality that already exists within you. But there's more. The Gospel itself records these revolutionary words. When you make the two one, and make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the above like the below, and when you unite the male and the female into one so that the male is not male and the female is not female, then you will enter the kingdom. This is not traditional theology. This is spiritual alchemy. This is the description of a process of inner transformation that anyone can experience. In the Gospel of Philip, we find even more shocking revelations about the nature of spiritual reality. Those who say that the Lord first died and rose again are mistaken, for he first rose again and then died. Unless one first obtains the resurrection, he will not die. As surely as God lives, he will die. Do you understand what this means? The resurrection is not a future event. It is an awakening of consciousness that must occur while you are alive. The same text reveals the hidden role of Mary Magdalene. There were three who walked continually with the Lord: Mary his mother and her sister, and Magdalene, who is called her companion, for Mary is his sister, his mother, and his companion. She was no ordinary disciple. She was his spiritual companion, his equal in wisdom, possibly the one who best understood his teachings. And here comes the revelation that the patriarchal church could not tolerate. The Savior's companion is Mary Magdalene. Christ loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her frequently on the mouth. The other disciples were upset by this and expressed their disapproval. They said to him, "Why do you love her more than all of us?" The Savior replied, "Why don't I love you as I love her?" Imagine the impact of this revelation on a religious structure built on the exclusion of women from spiritual leadership. Imagine how this would have changed the entire history of Christianity if it had been preserved in official texts. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, fragmentary but revealing, contains direct dialogues between her and Jesus about the nature of spiritual vision. Peter said to her, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than other women. Tell us the words of the Savior that you remember, which you know but we do not, which we have not heard." She had access to secret teachings that not even the apostles knew. In that same Gospel, Mary reveals a teaching of Jesus about the nature of reality. The Savior said, "There is no sin, but you commit sin when you do those things that are of the nature of adultery, which is called sin." This is a radically different understanding of sin, not as an inherent condition, but as a distortion of the original divine nature. The Gospel of Truth, attributed to Valentine, contains perhaps the most profound revelation about the human condition. Error grew stronger and labored over its material in vain because it did not know the truth. It set about fashioning a creature, striving to fashion beautifully the substitute for truth. According to this text, the entire experience of human suffering is the result of a fundamental error, the belief that we are separate from our divine nature. And here's the key to it all. But when he who is perfect appeared, he taught them about the Father, the unknown. He breathed the breath of truth into them. Error was filled with power. filled with ignorance. He was crucified, he was blotted out, he was destroyed. The crucifixion, according to this gospel, was not Jesus' sacrifice for our sins. It was the destruction of the error of separation that kept humanity in ignorance. The Gospel of the Savior, another Nag Hammadi text, contains this revolutionary teaching. Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself will become like him, and hidden things will be revealed to him. It doesn't speak of external worship or devotion. It speaks of complete identification with the Christ consciousness, of becoming what Jesus represented. In the Gospel of Judas, the most controversial of all, we find a completely different version of the betrayal. Jesus said to him, "You will surpass them all, for you will sacrifice the man who clothes me." According to this text, Judas did not betray Jesus. He fulfilled a spiritual mission to liberate the divine consciousness from its physical incarnation. The Gospel according to Philip contains this revelation about the nature of death. Those who say they will die first and then be raised are mistaken. Unless they first receive the resurrection while they are alive, when they die, they will receive nothing. Again and again, these texts insist that spiritual transformation must occur during life, not after death. And here is the teaching that the institutional church feared most. God is a devourer of men. That is why men are sacrificed to him. Before men were sacrificed, animals were sacrificed, for those to whom they are sacrificed are not gods. This passage reveals a direct critique of the system of sacrifice and mediation that would become the basis of official Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas ends with this revelation about spiritual gender. Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary go away from us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Behold, I will bring her to make her a man, so that she also may become a living spirit like you men. For every woman who becomes a man will enter the kingdom of heaven." This is not misogyny. It is spiritual alchemy. It speaks of transcending gender dualities in a state of unified consciousness. Do you realize the magnitude of what was hidden? These aren't simply alternative teachings. It's a completely different understanding of spirituality. A vision where divinity isn't separate from you, where salvation isn't dependent on external institutions, where spiritual awakening is your birthright and your personal responsibility. These Gospels reveal a Jesus who did not come to found a religion, but to awaken the divine consciousness that already exists in every human being. A teacher who spoke not of worship, but of identification. A guide who did not promise future salvation, but present transformation. And now you understand why they had to be banned. Because a humanity that knew these truths would be impossible to control. A humanity that knew it was already divine would not need intermediaries between itself and the sacred. A humanity that understood that the kingdom of heaven is within itself would not build temples to seek it outside. But here's the most powerful thing of all. The Gospel of Thomas contains this final statement that shatters the entire traditional religious system. Jesus said, "I am the light that is over all things. I am everything. Everything came from me, and everything came to me. Split a log and I am there. Lift a stone and you will find me there." It's not talking about a distant God. It's talking about a divine presence that permeates all of reality, including you. The Gospel of Philip reveals the ultimate secret about the nature of Christ. Before Christ, some went out from where they could not enter, and went in where they could not go out. But when Christ came, he brought out those who had entered, and brought in those who had gone out. This is the perfect description of what it means to awaken spiritually, to emerge from the state of ignorance where you believed you were separate from the divine, and enter into the recognition of your true nature. And the final revelation of the gospel of truth that changes everything. Therefore do not be jealous of one another, for where there is jealousy and rivalry, there is disorder, but where there is unity, there is perfection. Since deficiency arose because you did not know the Father, from the moment you know the Father, deficiency will no longer exist. Separation, suffering, desperate spiritual searching, all are the result of not knowing your true divine identity. These Gospels are not history books. They are manuals of transformation. They were not written to be believed, but to be experienced. Every word, every teaching, every revelation is designed to awaken in you the recognition of what you have always been, but have been taught to forget. You now possess the knowledge that was hidden for millennia. You know the exact words that were forbidden. You have seen the truth they didn't want you to know. The question is, what are you going to do with this revelation? Are you going to bury it under the weight of habit and fear? Or are you going to allow it to transform your understanding of who you truly are? Now we're going to unmask the most sophisticated manipulation machine in human history. Because what you've just discovered about the forbidden Gospels is just the beginning. The real conspiracy lies in how they transformed free spirituality into a system of total control. How they turned Jesus' message of liberation into invisible chains that have enslaved humanity for nearly 2 millennia. It all began in the year 325, when Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. But here's what they didn't teach you in Sunday school. Constantine wasn't a Christian when he made this decision. He was a shrewd politician who saw in rising Christianity a threat to the stability of the empire. If he couldn't destroy it, he would absorb it. He would turn it into a tool of the state. The manipulation was as brilliant as it was diabolical. Instead of persecuting Christians, Constantine invited them to become part of the imperial power. He offered them wealth, status, and political influence. The condition was simple: unify the Christian message in such a way that it served the interests of the empire, not the spiritual liberation of the people. The result was devastating for authentic spirituality. At Nicaea, 300 bishops, many of them already corrupted by political power, decided which teachings would be orthodox and which would be heretical. And their criterion was not spiritual truth. Their criterion was political utility. Does this teaching strengthen the authority of the church? It's included. Does this teaching spiritually empower the individual? It's prohibited. It was in Nicaea that the dogma of the Trinity as we know it today was born. Not because it was a truth revealed by Jesus, but because it was a theological formula that justified the need for an institutional church to interpret these mysteries for the ignorant masses. If the relationship with the divine was so complex that it required sophisticated theological explanations, then people needed priests to explain them. But the most sinister manipulation was the transformation of the concept of salvation. Jesus had taught that the kingdom of heaven was within each person, that the connection with the divine was direct and immediate. The councils transformed this into a system where salvation depended on ecclesiastical mediation. They created the doctrine of original sin to generate guilt. They established the sacraments as requirements for salvation. They invented purgatory to extend the church's control even after death. Do you realize the perverse genius of this manipulation? They took the most liberating message in human history and turned it into the most effective system of control ever devised. Instead of teaching people that they were already divine, they convinced them they were born sinners in need of external salvation. Instead of empowering them spiritually, they made them dependent on an institution. The Council of Constantinople in 553 took this manipulation even further. They officially ordered the destruction of all texts that contradicted official doctrine. It wasn't censorship, it was cultural and spiritual extermination. They burned entire libraries. They persecuted the guardians of the original teachings. They erased from history the voices that might have preserved the truth. And here is the most chilling evidence of institutional manipulation. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the architects of the official history of Christianity, explicitly wrote in his private letters that it was necessary to use white lies for the good of the church. He openly admitted that they distorted historical truth to create a narrative that served their institutional purposes. Over the following centuries, the church perfected this system of control. They prohibited lay people from reading the Bible in their own language. They established Latin as the official liturgical language, ensuring that the masses would not understand what was said in religious services. They created a priestly class that monopolized access to the sacred. The Inquisition was the most brutal expression of this institutional manipulation. It wasn't just religious persecution. It was the systematic extermination of any form of spirituality that didn't submit to ecclesiastical control. The Cathars, who kept alive some of Jesus' original teachings, were completely massacred. The Gnostics, who preserved the tradition of direct spiritual experience, were hunted to extinction. And you know what's most revealing about all this? That the church was so afraid of Jesus' authentic teachings that it was willing to commit genocide to suppress them. If they really had the truth on their side, why would they need to physically eliminate those who thought differently? But the most sophisticated manipulation came later, the creation of the concept of infallible papal authority. For 1,000 years, the church functioned as a decentralized confederation of Christian communities. But in the 11th century, with the Gregorian reforms, they centralized all power in Rome. They declared the Pope to be Christ's direct representative on earth, infallible in matters of faith and morals. Do you realize what this meant? That questioning the Church's decisions became questioning God himself. That doubting official doctrine became a heresy punishable by death. They created a system where independent spiritual inquiry was literally impossible without risking one's life. The sale of indulgences was perhaps the most obscene expression of this manipulation. They convinced people that they could buy God's forgiveness, that they could reduce their time in purgatory by paying money to the church. They literally monetized salvation. They turned divine grace into a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. But here's the most perverse thing of all. They knew exactly what they were doing. Internal medieval church documents reveal that many church leaders were aware that they were distorting Jesus' original message. But they had built such a vast empire, accumulated so much political and economic power, that preserving the institution had become more important than preserving spiritual truth. The Council of Trent in the 16th century was the Church's response to the Protestant Reformation. But instead of correcting abuses and returning to the original teachings, it doubled down. It officially declared that church tradition had the same authority as Scripture. It established that the Church was the sole authoritative interpreter of divine truth. It prohibited independent theological research. And do you know what's most tragicomic about this story? The very same men who had completely distorted Jesus' message declared themselves his only legitimate representatives on earth. The very same people who had banned his deepest teachings claimed to be his spiritual heirs. True faith was turned into a tool of control. The direct connection with the divine was replaced by institutional dependence. Individual spiritual awakening was replaced by blind obedience to ecclesiastical authority. And all this was done in the name of the same Jesus who had taught exactly the opposite. But here's what should outrage you the most. This manipulation didn't end in the Middle Ages. It continues to this day. The same control structures, the same manipulation tactics, the same methods for keeping people spiritually dependent. Only now they're more subtle, more sophisticated, and harder to detect. Now that you know the machinery of manipulation, now that you've seen how they transformed spiritual freedom into religious slavery, you have a decision to make. Will you continue to be complicit in your own spiritual manipulation? Or will you reclaim the divine power that was always yours but that you were taught to surrender to others? Because this institutional manipulation wasn't an accident of history. It was a plan meticulously executed over centuries. Every dogma they created, every ritual they established, every power structure they built, all had one purpose: to keep you spiritually dependent, controlled, asleep. They transformed direct mystical experience into repetitive liturgy. They turned contemplative prayer into mechanical recitation. They replaced inner searching with external ceremonies. They replaced the sacred silence where you listen to the voice of your soul with sermons, where you listen to the opinions of others. And most insidious of all, they convinced you that this manipulation was for your own good, that you needed this mediation because you weren't capable of connecting with the divine on your own, that you required this external authority because your own spiritual intuition wasn't trustworthy. But now you know the truth. Now you understand that what you were told was your spiritual weakness is actually your greatest strength, that what you were taught to fear about yourself is precisely what will set you free. That direct connection with the divine is not only possible, but is your natural state. Now is the time to reconstruct the truth. After unmasking centuries of manipulation, after revealing the forbidden texts, it's time to understand what Jesus' project really was. Because when you remove all the layers of institutional distortion, When you strip away all the dogmas added by the councils, when you return to the original words that were hidden, a completely different image of the Master emerges. Jesus did not come to found a religion. This is the first truth you must impress upon your mind. At no point, in any of his authentic teachings, did he speak of creating temples, establishing priestly hierarchies, or forming an institution to mediate between humanity and the divine. His project was exactly the opposite, to awaken in each person a recognition of their inherent divine nature. The Gospel of Thomas preserves this fundamental teaching. The kingdom is within you and is outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. Do you notice? It's not talking about external salvation. It's talking about self-knowledge. It's not talking about future redemption. It's talking about present recognition of your divine identity. Jesus' true intention was revolutionary in the deepest sense of the word. He didn't seek to reform the existing religious system. He sought to transcend it completely. He wanted to show humanity that every person had direct access to the same divine source he represented, that there were no necessary intermediaries between the individual soul and universal consciousness. Jesus never spoke of temples because he knew that the true temple was the human body. He never established rituals because he understood that life itself was sacred when lived consciously. He never created dogmas because he knew that spiritual truth must be experienced, not blindly believed. His original teachings pointed toward a transformation of consciousness, not a new form of religious worship. When he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he wasn't declaring himself the sole savior of humanity. He was revealing the state of consciousness that anyone could achieve, complete identification with the divine presence. The Gospel of Philip explains it clearly. Those who say that the Lord first died and rose again are mistaken, for he first rose again and then died. The resurrection was not a future physical event. It was the awakening of consciousness that was to occur while you were alive. It was the recognition of your immortal nature, of your divine essence that was never born and never dies. Jesus spoke in parables not to confuse, but to plant seeds of awakening at different levels of consciousness. Each story, each metaphor, was designed to activate the inner recognition of truths that already existed within the listener. It wasn't external information he imparted, it was internal activation he facilitated. Jesus' true intention is revealed in his most profound words, "Greater works than these you shall do." He did not see himself as an unattainable divine exception. He saw himself as a model of what every human being could become, as an example of the divine potential that lay dormant within each person, waiting to be awakened. His teaching about the kingdom of heaven was radical. It wasn't a place you went to after you died, but a state of consciousness you could experience here and now. It was the direct perception of the divine reality that had always been present, but that you hadn't learned to see. It was the awakening of spiritual vision that recognized the sacred in the ordinary. Jesus never demanded worship, he demanded imitation. He never demanded blind devotion, he demanded awakened understanding. He never demanded obedience to external authorities. He demanded fidelity to the inner voice of divine wisdom that each person possessed. Jesus' real project was to create a humanity of awakened beings, not a humanity of dependent followers. He wanted each person to discover their own direct connection to the divine source, not to rely on institutions to mediate that connection. He sought to spiritually empower people, not to create structures that kept them spiritually dependent. His teachings on love were not external moral commandments. They were descriptions of the natural state of consciousness that emerges when you recognize your fundamental oneness with all existence. When you awaken to your divine nature, love is not something you have to practice. It is something you are, something that flows naturally from your transformed state of being. The cross, in its original meaning, did not represent a sacrifice for the sins of others. It represented the crucifixion of the separate ego, the death of the illusion of separation that keeps people disconnected from their divine nature. It was a symbol of personal transformation, not vicarious atonement. Jesus never spoke of sin as an inherited condition requiring external salvation. He spoke of ignorance as a temporary state that could be healed through the awakening of spiritual knowledge. Sin was simply the consequence of not knowing your true divine identity. His message was one of total liberation. Liberation from fear, liberation from guilt, liberation from external spiritual dependence, liberation from the belief in separation from the divine. He wanted each person to discover that they were already whole, already sacred, already a perfect expression of divine consciousness. The prayer he taught wasn't a petition to an external God. It was an acknowledgement of the divine presence that already existed within each person. Our Father who art in heaven referred to the state of heightened consciousness that is your true spiritual home, not to a distant deity who needed to be appeased. Jesus never established sacraments because he knew that all of life was sacramental when lived consciously. Every moment was an opportunity for direct communion with the divine. Every breath was a prayer. Every act of love was an expression of divine nature. His true intention was simple and revolutionary, to restore to every human being the spiritual power that had always been theirs by divine right. To show that the separation between the human and the divine was an illusion. To reveal that the kingdom of heaven was not a place you went to, but a state of consciousness you already were. And now that you know his true intention, now that you understand that his project was not to create a religion, but to awaken the divinity in every person, you have to ask yourself, are you ready to accept responsibility for your own divinity? Do you have the courage to live as the conscious expression of the sacred that you truly are? Because this is exactly what Jesus wanted to awaken in you, not the adoration of his person, but the recognition of your own Christ nature. Not dependence on his intercession, but trust in your direct access to the same divine source. Not the external imitation of his actions, but the authentic expression of the same consciousness he embodied. His project was so radical that the very institution built in his name had to ban his deepest teachings, because a humanity that knew his true intention would never have allowed the spiritual manipulation that followed. A humanity that understood his original message would never have surrendered its divine power to outside institutions. The time to wake up is now. The time to claim your spiritual inheritance is right now. Jesus didn't come to save you from yourself. He came to remind you of who you really are. And now that you know that, the question is, what are you going to do with this revolutionary truth? But before I continue revealing the deepest secrets that have been hidden, I need to ask you a question that fascinates me every time I post these videos. A question that connects me with you in a way that goes beyond words, beyond information, beyond even these truths we are discovering together. Where in the world are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. Write your country, your city, the corner of the planet from where these truths are reaching you, because I want to know how far this light, hidden for so long, is traveling. I want to understand the magnitude of this awakening that is occurring simultaneously on every continent. Every time I read the comments, every time I see where each person who arrives here comes from, I am amazed. From Spain to Argentina, from Colombia to Chile, from Guatemala to El Salvador, from Peru to Ecuador. There is something magical, something that is no coincidence, in the fact that these truths are finding their way to people who are ready to receive them, regardless of geographical borders. Because what we are experiencing here is not just the transmission of historical information, it is the awakening of a collective consciousness that transcends the limitations of space and time. It is the activation of a network of souls who are remembering who they truly are, who are awakening from centuries of induced spiritual sleep. When you write your location in the comments, when you tell me where you're watching this from, you're not just sharing a geographic coordinate. You're declaring your participation in something much larger. You're affirming that you're part of this silent revolution of consciousness that's spreading across the planet. And there's something profoundly meaningful in the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're in a large cosmopolitan city or a small village lost in the mountains. It doesn't matter whether you come from a traditionally Catholic culture or grew up in a completely secular environment. Authentic spiritual truth has a way of finding those who are ready to receive it. It's as if there were an invisible call ringing in the souls of millions of people at the same time. A call that says, it's time to wake up, it's time to remember, it's time to reclaim your spiritual power. And that call knows no borders, no language, no cultural differences. When I read that people are watching this from Mexico, from Colombia, from Spain, from Chile, from every corner of the Spanish-speaking world, I understand that we are witnessing something extraordinary. We are seeing the truth finding its way back to the people who need it after having been hidden for almost 2 millennia. And I want you to know something important. Your presence here is no accident. The fact that you've reached this video, the fact that these words are resonating within you, the fact that you feel that mixture of excitement and recognition as you listen to these revelations, all of that means there's something inside you that's been waiting for this moment. There are people who will watch this video and feel resistance, fear, and feel that this challenges their established beliefs too much. But you are here. You have reached this point in this video. That means your soul is ready for these truths. Every comment I read, every location shared, every message of thanks or surprise I receive confirms to me that we're creating more than just a YouTube channel. We're building a global community of truth seekers. A network of people who refuse to continue living in spiritual lies, who have the courage to question what they've always been told is unquestionable. And that community includes people like you who are watching this from your country, from your city, from your home, but who are connected through something much deeper than technology. They are connected through the awakening of consciousness, through the recognition of truths that go beyond superficial differences of nationality or culture. That's why I need you to write in the comments where you're watching this from. Because every time someone shares their location, every time they declare their presence in this search for truth, they are strengthening the network of light that is spreading throughout the world. They are confirming that this revelation of hidden truths is not a local phenomenon, but a global awakening. So take a moment right now, go to the comments, and write from where on the planet these truths are reaching you. Be part of this map of awakened consciousnesses being created in real time. Declare your participation in this spiritual revolution that is changing millions of people's understanding of who they really are and what their true divine potential is. Now that you're part of this global network of truth seekers, it's time for you to learn exactly how they rewrote history, because what I'm about to reveal to you isn't conspiracy theories. It's documented facts, precise dates, and specific names of those who orchestrated the greatest manipulation in human spiritual history. The rewriting officially began in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. But to understand the magnitude of this manipulation, you need to know what existed before that fateful moment. For the first 3 centuries after Jesus' death, Christianity was a diverse, decentralized movement with dozens of different interpretations of his teachings. There were the Ebionites, who regarded Jesus as a human prophet, not a deity. There were the Nicaeites, who believed that the God of the Old Testament was different from the Father Jesus had revealed. The Gnostics taught that salvation came through direct spiritual knowledge, not blind faith. The Montanists emphasized the continuing revelation of the Holy Spirit through contemporary prophets. Each group had its own sacred texts, its own traditions, its own interpretations of what it meant to follow Jesus. It was a living, dynamic Christianity, constantly evolving spiritually, and that represented a huge problem for Emperor Constantine. Constantine did not convert to Christianity by divine revelation. He converted out of political calculation. Christianity had spread so far throughout the empire that it was no longer possible to suppress it through persecution. If he couldn't destroy it, he would absorb it. He would turn it into a tool of the Roman state. But for Christianity to serve imperial purposes, it needed to be unified, controlled, and standardized. A diverse spiritual movement was impossible to manipulate. A movement with a single official version of the truth was perfectly controllable. At Nicaea, Constantine gathered 300 bishops from across the empire. But here's the detail that changes everything. Not all Christian leaders were invited. Only those who had already demonstrated a willingness to collaborate with the imperial power. The leaders of the most independent, most spiritual communities, most faithful to the original teachings, were deliberately excluded. The emperor personally presided over the sessions, a pagan leading debates on the divine nature of Christ, a politician deciding what constituted spiritual truth. The irony was so grotesque that some bishops protested, but were silenced or expelled from the council. The result was the creation of the Nicene Creed, a theological formula based not on the teachings of Jesus, but on political considerations. The doctrine of the Trinity as we know it today was decided by vote, not by revelation. 300 men voted on the nature of God as if they were electing a public official. But the real rewriting of history began after the council. Constantine ordered the production of 50 official copies of the scriptures. These copies included only the texts that had been approved at Nicaea. All other gospels, letters, apocalypses, and teachings were declared heretical. And here comes the most sinister part. They weren't content with declaring the banned texts heretical. They ordered their systematic destruction. They sent soldiers to libraries, monasteries, and Christian communities with specific orders to burn all writings not on the official list. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, who actively participated in this rewriting, wrote in his personal letters, "The books of heretics must be publicly burned so that no trace of their impious doctrines remains." This wasn't censorship. It was cultural extermination. For the next 200 years, this destruction continued systematically. The Council of Constantinople in 553 formalized book burning as official church policy. Thousands of texts containing Jesus' original teachings were reduced to ashes, but burning the books wasn't enough. They also needed to rewrite the history of what had been destroyed. Eusebius, in his ecclesiastical history, presented a completely fabricated version of the early centuries of Christianity. According to his narrative, there had always been only one true version of Christianity, and all others were heretical deviations. This historical falsification was so successful that for 1500 years, humanity believed that early Christianity had been uniform from its beginnings. They believed that the canonical Gospels were the only ones that had existed. They believed that the official doctrines faithfully reflected the original teachings of Jesus. The reality is exactly the opposite. The official Christianity we know today is the result of systematic political manipulation. The texts that were preserved were so because they served the interests of imperial power. The texts that were destroyed were so because they contained spiritual truths that would have made religious control impossible. They rewrote history to make you believe that there had always been only one true interpretation of Jesus' message. They erased the evidence that a free, diverse, and empowered Christian spirituality had existed for centuries. They eliminated all traces of communities that practiced direct connection with the divine without the need for institutional intermediaries. The manipulation was so complete that they even altered the few texts they chose to preserve. The canonical Gospels we read today have been edited, modified, and censored multiple times over the centuries. Every time they found passages that didn't align with official doctrine, they eliminated or modified them. For example, in the oldest manuscripts of Mark's Gospel, Jesus never claims to be God. These statements were added in later copies. In the original versions of the Gospels, Mary Magdalene appears as a spiritual leader. These references were systematically eliminated or distorted. They rewrote history so completely that they convinced you that the manipulated version was the original, and that any evidence of authentic teachings was a later forgery. They completely reversed historical reality, and for centuries this lie worked perfectly, until 1945, when an Egyptian peasant found a jar in the desert containing the texts they had tried to destroy. The Hammadi Gospels revealed the truth they had tried to bury forever. Now you know how they rewrote history. Now you understand that what they taught you as the original truth was actually the result of centuries of political manipulation. They rewrote history to control you spiritually. And for almost 2,000 years, that manipulation worked perfectly. But here's the question that really matters. What does all this mean for you today? How does knowing that Jesus' deepest teachings were hidden change your life? What impact does discovering that you have direct access to the same divine source he represented have on your present? Because we're not just talking about ancient history. We're talking about a revelation that can completely transform your spiritual experience right now. When you understand that the kingdom of heaven is within you, when you recognize that you already possess the same divine nature that Jesus embodied, everything changes. The first transformation you experience is the liberation from spiritual fear. For centuries, you were taught to fear God. to fear judgment, to fear not being good enough to deserve salvation. But when you discover that you are now an expression of the divine, that you are now spiritually complete, that fear completely dissolves. There is nothing to fear when you recognize that you are a conscious manifestation of the same source that created everything that exists. There is no divine judgment to condemn you when you understand that you and the divine are aspects of the same reality. There is no salvation you need to earn when you awaken to the fact that you are already sacred by nature. The second transformation is the liberation from religious guilt. You were taught that you were born in sin, that you were intrinsically flawed, that you needed external redemption to be acceptable to God. But Jesus' original teachings reveal the exact opposite, that you were born as a perfect expression of divine consciousness. When you understand this, when you truly integrate it into your being, the guilt programmed into you since childhood simply vanishes. You realize that you were never separate from the divine. You realize that you were never flawed. You realize that you were always a pure expression of divine love expressing itself through human form. The third transformation is the liberation from external spiritual dependence. You no longer need anyone to tell you how to connect with the sacred. You no longer need intermediaries to interpret divine will for you. You no longer need institutions to mediate your relationship with the source of all existence. You discover that you have direct, immediate, and constant access to the same divine wisdom that guided Jesus. You can receive personal revelations, you can experience the divine presence in your daily life, and you can live from a state of conscious connection with the sacred without depending on external authorities. This is the true spirituality Jesus taught, the direct experience of your divine nature, not the belief in doctrines about your divine nature, not the hope of one day experiencing your divine nature, the present, immediate, tangible experience of who you really are. And when you live from this understanding, everything in your life is transformed. Your relationships change because you no longer seek in others what you can only find within yourself. Your work becomes an expression of your divine nature, not a struggle for survival. Your challenges become opportunities for spiritual growth, not evidence of divine punishment. But perhaps most powerful of all is that you become a beacon of this truth for others. When you live from the recognition of your divine nature, you radiate a presence that awakens the same recognition in those around you. You become what Jesus truly was, a living reminder of the divine potential that exists in every human being. And here's what should excite you most. This transformation doesn't require years of spiritual practice. It doesn't require complicated rituals. It doesn't require renouncing the world. It simply requires acknowledging who you already are. It requires awakening to the truth that was always there, but that you had been taught to ignore. True spirituality begins when you stop being afraid of the truth, when you stop needing others to tell you who you are spiritually, when you stop searching in ancient texts for what is available in the living presence of this moment. Because the divine presence that Jesus embodied was not limited to his historical person. It is the same presence that is reading these words right now. It is the same consciousness that is processing this information. It is the same divine intelligence that is feeling the resonance of these truths at this moment. Can you feel it? Can you recognize that the consciousness present here, experiencing, knowing, being, is the same divine consciousness that expressed itself through Jesus 2,000 years ago? Can you see that you are not separate from the source of all that exists? This is the revelation that changes everything, that you do not have a divine soul. You are the divine soul experiencing itself through a human form. You have no connection to God. You are the expression of God manifesting as individual consciousness. You are not seeking spiritual awakening. You are spiritual awakening occurring as a human experience. And when this isn't just a philosophical idea, but a lived experience, you realize that everything you needed was already here. That the entire spiritual quest was simply the divine game of forgetting oneself in order to rediscover oneself. That all separation was a temporary illusion that allowed for the experience of reunion. This understanding doesn't separate you from the world. It connects you more deeply to all that exists. Because when you recognize your divine nature, you automatically recognize the same divine nature in all beings. When you awaken to who you truly are, the entire world becomes a mirror of your own sacred essence. And this is the true impact of knowing Jesus' authentic teachings. You don't just change yourself, you change the quality of your presence in the world. You become an agent of awakening for all of humanity. You become what Jesus truly intended, another human being fully awakened to their divine nature, living as an example of what is possible for all. And now we come to the most important moment of this entire journey, the moment when you have to decide whether these truths remain as fascinating information in your mind or whether they become the living transformation of your existence. Because this was no coincidence. Your presence here at this moment listening to these words is not a cosmic accident. You were called to wake up. Something in you knew there was more, that there was a deeper truth waiting to be discovered. Something in your soul refused to accept the watered-down versions of spirituality that had been offered to you. And that something brought you here, to this moment of revelation, to this invitation to a more complete awakening of your being. Look back for a moment. Think of all the circumstances that had to align for you to be here now, all the searches that led you down different paths, all the disappointments with partial answers that kept you searching, all the sacred restlessness that never allowed you to settle for explanations that didn't fully resonate with your inner truth. All of this was life preparing you for this moment. All of this was your soul orchestrating the necessary experiences so you could be ready to receive these truths. All of this was the divine calling that lives within you, drawing you toward the recognition of who you truly are, because the light has always been within you. From the first moment of your existence, from before you formed your first conscious thought, the same divine light that shone through Jesus has been shining at the center of your being, not as something you needed to acquire, but as something you always were. All spiritual quests, all religious practices, all studies of sacred texts were not meant to find something that was lost. They were meant to peel away the layers of conditioning that prevented you from seeing what was always there. They were meant to dissolve the illusions of separation that kept you disconnected from your own divine nature. And now that you know this, now that you've seen through the veil of institutional manipulation, now that you've touched the truth of Jesus' original teachings, you have a sacred responsibility, not only to yourself but to all humanity, because every person who awakens to their divine nature becomes a beacon of possibility for all others. Every human being who refuses to live in the spiritual lie makes it easier for others to awaken as well. Every soul who remembers their true identity contributes to the collective awakening of the human species. This is your moment. This is your calling. Not in a few years when you have more time, not when you've resolved all your personal issues, not when you feel more spiritually prepared. Now, in this present moment, with life exactly as it is now. Because awakening is not a future event that will occur when certain conditions are met. Awakening is the present recognition of who you already are. It is shifting your attention away from stories about why you can't be who you truly are, and placing it on the direct experience of your divine nature here and now. Can you feel that presence here reading these words? Can you recognize the consciousness that is experiencing this moment? That presence, that consciousness, that experience of being that is here right now, that is who you are. That is your divine nature. That is the very essence that Jesus represented. It's not hidden behind your thoughts. It's not waiting for you to meditate long enough to appear. It's not conditioned on you behaving in a certain way. It's here now, being what you are, experiencing what you are experiencing, knowing what you are knowing. Awakening is so simple that the mind complicates it. It's so present that we seek it in the future. It's so intimate that we project it onto others. It's so ordinary that we think it must be extraordinary. Your divine nature isn't something you have to achieve. It's something you have to stop denying. It's not something you have to develop. It's something you have to stop hiding behind stories about your limitations. It's not something you have to deserve. It's something you have to stop rejecting out of fear of your own magnificence. The invitation is here. The call is ringing in your heart right now. The door to awakening is wide open. All that is required is for you to say yes. Yes to the truth of who you are. Yes to the responsibility of living from your divine nature. Yes to the courage to be an example of what is possible when a human being fully remembers their spiritual identity. This wasn't a coincidence. You were called to awaken. The light was always within you, waiting for this moment of recognition. And now that the moment has arrived, the question is simple. Will you answer the call? And now we come to the most important moment of this entire journey. The moment when you have to decide whether these truths remain as fascinating information in your mind or whether they become the living transformation of your existence. Because this was no coincidence. Your presence here at this moment, listening to these words, is not a cosmic accident. You were called to wake up. Something in you knew there was more, that there was a deeper truth waiting to be discovered. Something in your soul refused to accept the watered-down versions of spirituality that had been offered to you. And that something brought you here, to this moment of revelation, to this invitation to a more complete awakening of your being. Look back for a moment. Think of all the circumstances that had to align for you to be here now, all the searches that led you down different paths, all the disappointments with partial answers that kept you searching, all the sacred restlessness that never allowed you to settle for explanations that didn't fully resonate with your inner truth. All of this was life preparing you for this moment. All of this was your soul orchestrating the necessary experiences so you could be ready to receive these truths. All of this was the divine calling that lives within you, drawing you toward the recognition of who you truly are, because the light has always been within you. From the first moment of your existence, from before you formed your first conscious thought, the same divine light that shone through Jesus has been shining at the center of your being, not as something you needed to acquire, but as something you always were. All spiritual quests, all religious practices, all studies of sacred texts were not meant to find something that was lost. They were meant to peel away the layers of conditioning that prevented you from seeing what was always there. They were meant to dissolve the illusions of separation that kept you disconnected from your own divine nature. And now that you know this, now that you've seen through the veil of institutional manipulation, now that you've touched the truth of Jesus' original teachings, you have a sacred responsibility, not only to yourself but to all humanity, because every person who awakens to their divine nature becomes a beacon of possibility for all others. Every human being who refuses to live in the spiritual lie makes it easier for others to awaken as well. Every soul who remembers their true identity contributes to the collective awakening of the human species. This is your moment. This is your calling. Not in a few years when you have more time, not when you've resolved all your personal issues, not when you feel more spiritually prepared. Now, in this present moment, with life exactly as it is now. Because awakening is not a future event that will occur when certain conditions are met. Awakening is the present recognition of who you already are. It is shifting your attention away from stories about why you can't be who you truly are, and placing it on the direct experience of your divine nature here and now. Can you feel that presence here reading these words? Can you recognize the consciousness that is experiencing this moment? That presence, that consciousness, that experience of being that is here right now, that is who you are. That is your divine nature. That is the very essence that Jesus represented. It's not hidden behind your thoughts. It's not waiting for you to meditate long enough to appear. It's not conditioned on you behaving in a certain way. It's here now, being what you are, experiencing what you are experiencing, knowing what you are knowing. Awakening is so simple that the mind complicates it. It's so present that we seek it in the future. It's so intimate that we project it onto others. It's so ordinary that we think it must be extraordinary. Your divine nature isn't something you have to achieve. It's something you have to stop denying. It's not something you have to develop. It's something you have to stop hiding behind stories about your limitations. It's not something you have to deserve. It's something you have to stop rejecting out of fear of your own magnificence. The invitation is here. The call is ringing in your heart right now. The door to awakening is wide open. All that is required is for you to say yes. Yes to the truth of who you are. Yes to the responsibility of living from your divine nature. Yes to the courage to be an example of what is possible when a human being fully remembers their spiritual identity. This wasn't a coincidence. You were called to awaken. The light was always within you, waiting for this moment of recognition. And now that the moment has arrived, the question is simple. Will you answer the call? If this has impacted you, if you feel that something deep has moved within you while listening to these revelations, if you recognize that there is a truth here that your soul has been seeking for a long time, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel. Do it now. Not tomorrow. Not when you have more time. Not when you've processed all this information. Now, because what you've just experienced is only the beginning of a journey that will completely transform your understanding of spirituality, your own divine nature, and the truths that have been hidden for millennia. This video you watch today is just the first piece of a much larger puzzle. The revelations you've heard, shocking as they may be, are only the surface of secrets that go much deeper than you can imagine. There are entire gospels that were erased from history that contain teachings that could revolutionize not only your spiritual life, but also all of humanity's understanding of its true potential. There are texts that reveal specific techniques Jesus taught to awaken Christ consciousness in anyone. There are documents that explain exactly how to access the same states of consciousness he experienced. There are gospels that contain the exact words he used to transform the understanding of those who listened to him. And all of this has been waiting in secret libraries, in forbidden archives, in private collections that very few have had access to. But now, for the first time in almost 2,000 years, these truths are being released to anyone with the courage to know them. In the next video, I'm going to reveal another gospel that was completely removed from official history. A text so powerful, so transformative, that the very church that claimed to follow Jesus ordered it to be publicly burned. A gospel that contains the exact instructions for experiencing the same resurrection of consciousness he taught. This text doesn't speak of future events. It speaks of transformations you can experience today. It doesn't describe complicated rituals. It describes simple recognitions that can instantly change your experience of reality. It doesn't promise salvation after death. It reveals the immortality of the consciousness that you already are, but there's something else. Something that will surprise you even more than everything you've heard today. Because this lost gospel not only contains the teachings of Jesus, it also contains the teachings of Mary Magdalene, her own words, her own revelations, the wisdom she received directly, and that was considered so dangerous that they had to invent an entire false story about her identity to discredit her spiritual authority. You will discover that Mary Magdalene was not just a disciple. She was a teacher in her own right. She possessed knowledge that complemented and completed Jesus' teachings. She was the guardian of secrets about the feminine nature of the divine that the patriarchal church could not tolerate being known. And when you combine the teachings of both, when you see the full picture of what they truly taught together, you'll understand why they had to be separated, distorted, hidden. Because together they revealed a spirituality so empowering, so liberating, so transformative, that it would have made any form of external religious control impossible. But this is only a small part of what awaits you. There are other secrets, other revelations, other forbidden texts that will expand your understanding in ways you can't even imagine now. There is a whole tradition of esoteric teachings that extended far beyond what we call Christianity, connecting with ancient wisdom from Egypt, India, and mystical traditions that were systematically suppressed. And all of that is waiting for you in the upcoming videos. All that wisdom, all that truth, all that revelation of your true divine potential is here, ready to be discovered by those with the courage to look beyond the official versions. So subscribe right now, turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss a single revelation of what's to come. You don't want these long-hidden truths to be lost again in the noise of superficial information. Click subscribe, click the notification bell, and get ready for the next video where we'll uncover another gospel that will change everything you think you know about Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the divine potential that sleeps within you, waiting to be awakened. The consciousness revolution continues, and you're invited to be a part of it. Thank you for watching this video until the end. We will see you in the next video.